All right, welcome into episode 61 of the Losing Sucks Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, as always, Dustin Blanton, along with my trusty co-host, Travis Masterson. Travis, we are lucky enough to have with us today on episode 61. You've seen him on the interwebs. You've seen him talking. You've seen him championing
There you go.
Travis. I got that word out. You have seen him championing things such as his best 10 score, and you've seen his famous line that end of year stats are lazy stats. We've got Dennis Michelsen on the podcast today.
It's a big show.
DMIC on Twitter. You know, he champions using the scientific method to guide his process. We love a new perspective and a chance to learn more from him and all of his wisdom that he brings with him. You can catch him on scienceoffantasyfootball.com and the Science of Fantasy podcast. Dennis, welcome to the podcast, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Dustin, it's great to be here. I know I've ticked a few people off with my old saying that year-end stats are lazy stats, but let's face it, some of us like to be lazy, and some of us don't do the work, and then there's others that, statistics, we spend way too much time on them.
That's right.
I was one of the first actually when we started Losing Sucks about a year ago. And I was on Twitter. I think we had maybe 100, 200 followers. And I kept seeing your responses to people. And I was like, who is this guy? And he's telling everybody they're lazy. And then I would put stats out thinking that I'm doing something for the fantasy community by basically repeating who finished where. And then you tweeted at me saying, this doesn't help anybody. This just says who didn't get hurt. And I'm like, all right, who is this guy? And now looking back on it, I'm like, this guy was right all along. That was such a lazy thing to do.
Well, and here's the thing, folks, is I've been doing this forever. Okay. It doesn't mean I'm better at it than the guys that have just come along, but I've been playing with NFL stats. I've been trying to do predictions of year-end stats for longer than most people on Twitter have been alive.
Yeah.
And so,
No joke.
you do it for 35 years, and if you want to take it back to the extreme, I was playing a form of fantasy football in 1975. So,
That sounds like a made-up year.
yeah, it's crazy. We played a game called Six Packs where we picked six players each. Okay, there were six guys, six players each, six packs. We were teenagers.
Yeah.
We were stupid.
Of
All
course.
we counted was who scored the most touchdowns. That's it. We didn't count yards, didn't count anything, just how many touchdowns. If
I feel like you
scored
should bring
more
that
touchdowns-
back.
Oh, it'd be fun.
It
You
would.
score the most touchdowns, you win. Okay.
Yeah, it
And if
sounds
you
like
finish-
a standard fantasy football league.
It's
like
so
OPPR.
stupid. It was so simple. It was easy. But guys like Chuck Foreman, were the big stars
Sure.
of that. Walter Payton,
Yeah,
Right.
I've heard of that
But
guy.
yeah, so those are the guys that we're drafting. But that's how long I've been doing this. And
Wow.
it doesn't mean I'm better at it just because I've been doing it for a long time. But I've
Right.
learned a lot of the lessons that other folks learn along the way. And hey, when
Yeah.
I started doing projections, it took me about 12 years to figure out that year-end stats were
Yeah.
deceiving and they were basically worthless. They really didn't do what
That's awesome.
we needed to do.
I'm excited to dive into that because that's one of the things behind the scenes. Travis and I have gone back and forth talking about your method of talking to people and interacting with people, and just the things that you bring to the table. And honestly, you'll get some kickback from some people, and some people either they'll see the process, and you do a good job of explaining the process, and we'll get into that as well. But the big thing that we mentioned at the top of the show and that you bring with you is you talked about bringing the scientific method into fantasy football. And, we wanted to a big reason of having you on, we wanted to give you that opportunity to explain it to everyone, all of our listeners, what exactly that means, because you back up everything you say, because like you said, you've played this a long time and you understand your process well. How does the scientific method play into how you've developed this perspective on the game?
Yeah, I've been playing so long, I actually had hair when I started, but that's a whole nother story. So I'm a meteorologist. Okay, that's my training was as a meteorologist. My partner in crime over at scienceoffantasyfootball.com, and quite frankly, I'll be perfectly honest. We knew that the fake pigskin where we were riding was dying. The pig
Hmm.
was on his deathbed. By the way, the pulled pork sandwiches at the memorial were fantastic, but
Delicious.
Great.
we
Could taste
knew
the
that the
memories.
pig we knew the pig was going away, and when we started up our own thing, we realized that my partner in crime, Professor John Bush, he's a biology professor. He really is a PhD. He really is
Wow.
a professor. He teaches biology down in Arkansas. So, as a biologist and a meteorologist, we kind of got together and we're like, well, heck, what are we going to call it? Call it the science of fantasy football. Because what it means to use the scientific method is really simple and everybody can use it. You don't have to be a scientist. That's the great thing about it. Is it's just about the way you get to an answer. And the scientific method is all about having a question, having a hypothesis of what that the solution to this problem might be, and then coming up with a numerical way, a statistical way in the case of fantasy football to prove whether your theory is right or wrong.
But Dennis,
It's the difference between that and what a lot of people do with stats is they use statistics to support their belief that a particular player is
Yes.
the best player in the league.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is using statistics the way a drunk uses a light pole. A drunk doesn't use the light pole to give him illumination of what's great. He just hangs on to it and
oh,
uses
that's
it for
so good.
support.
That's so good because we have this argument all the time. Travis, what like you always? It's always anytime there's an argument between the two of us. It's always well, Zeke has had X amount of points per game, or this person like was running back 15 last year, and it's always like how do you like? Yeah, that's the past, but you're telling me and you're telling Travis that that's not the entire case. That's
No,
not everything.
no, it isn't because
I
fantasy
think it
football.
has its place. I think it has a role. The biggest role for me is when you're playing in home leagues and you have the fact of, and it is a fact that they finished there, but there's more layers to it, which is what you're going to explain. But surface level with your home leagues, if you say this guy was RB7 or RB15, whatever the case is, that holds weight. If you're selling something in a trade, you're getting the RB7, but there's always more to it. That's a different level of fantasy, which is why we're so intrigued by your method and watching like your responses on Twitter. Twitter's tough because our generation doesn't have the patience to to have a full conversation, 140 200 characters at a time because they click
Yeah.
off to a different app or they're doing something else and they forget to come back to it.
On to a new conversation.
It's
Where
different
where
being
is
able
he
to
at in
have
your
it.
ranks? And let me move on.
Yeah, exactly.
And here's the thing, guys. If we were playing fantasy football the way you used to play rotisserie baseball, okay, fantasy baseball was a rotisserie league. It was called that because there were 10 statistical categories and you counted the stats for every one. If we played fantasy football that way, okay, if we went ahead and we graded players just on total number of points at the end of the year, and even in best ball we don't do that, right? Because best ball we only grade the players on a weekly score, add
Right.
all those scores up and come up with the points. But imagine if we graded fantasy football different and we just said, okay, you're going to pick your team. You don't even have to set a lineup, so it's similar to best ball. And whoever scores the most points in the season is going to win this league. Then year end stats would matter because
Right.
then you would have, why year end stats don't matter is if I'm playing player X and I get 10 great games out of him and he gets hurt, do I take a zero or do I get to substitute somebody for the next 6 games?
This is what's so
That's
hard for my mind to
yes,
wrap
yes.
around.
That's right.
So that's how this whole process came about. But I started the way everybody else did. I thought, hey, everybody's doing year-end projections. I got to do year-end projections. And
Right.
what happened was this. In about it was actually year 12 of doing year-end projections, I was getting great at it. And all of a sudden, I'm within, a few percent on a majority of the players. And I look at my bankroll at the end of the year, and I'm going, damn,
Right.
I just barely made a profit. I'm
Yeah.
I'm right
Right.
on the money, and I made a profit that was so minuscule. And I said, there's got to be a better way. And that's how I started on this journey to where I am today.
You know what? That's such a great point, because at the end of the day, it's how is it beneficial for you, the actual player? It's all great and rosy until we're all just talking ourselves in circles about, oh, this value, this value, this value, and then at some point, fantasy football has to be played and money's got to be made. So that's a good point. And you say that you've got this different way of looking at it and how it kind of developed. One thing that you mentioned in your Introducing Weekly Values article that's up on your website, you mentioned your best 10 score, which I found really fascinating, because it's you use it as almost a predictor. It kind of gives credence to your thought process of it's a weekly game, not a yearly game. So my question is, how is this more of a predictor, more or less of a predictor in fantasy football than, let's say, something that is more mainstream, like points per game or something like that? How do you break it down, and how do you use it, and is it more beneficial?
It is more beneficial to me, and I'll kind of give you the quick way. The way it was born is, I did math, okay, and I was
I don't know
thinking,
what
oh
that is.
yeah, points per game. That's what it's going to be. But you have to grade the points per game on the games that are full games only, okay?
Right.
So that's what I started first doing, and I'm looking at just the full games played for each player, and I'm averaging them out, and I'm taking the points per game, and I'm going, there, that's the number I want. Because most people are too lazy to do that. They look at the points per game and they just average it out, whatever's on the website. And if that guy played one snap, he got that game. Well, one snap versus 30 snaps is
Right.
not the same. So you only have to look at complete games. If all you did was look at complete games played and calculated your own points per game, that would be better. But let me do a little math score for you and a little math test for you. So
Okay.
20 plus 1
Mhm.
plus 20
Okay.
plus 1, okay? 42,
Okay.
right? That's equal to 10, 10, 10, and 12. Which player would you rather have on your team? Would you rather have the guy that scored 20 points one week, 1 point next week, 20 points, and then 1?
Depends
Now
on when I'm
that's-
playing Travis. to be
When you
honest.
put it like, see, before this interview even, I would have probably said, give me the guy who's getting 10 to 12 consistently. But when you
Yes.
say it like that, the person who's getting those 2 weeks that you're getting 20, you've got a high chance of winning that week.
But the weeks you have won, you have a high chance of losing that league.
Right. So which one is more? Which one would you prefer?
I would prefer it depends on the format of the league. See, if I'm in best ball, I want a league full of guys that are 20-point guys, 1
High
point,
variance guys.
21.
They can alternate
I
it,
don't
yeah.
care. Correct. I don't care about the variance because the odds are going to be that the great guys are not going to have their great weeks all at the same time as the other great guys. There's going to
Okay.
be some variance to mix it up. But if I play in a lot of leagues, and here's where you have to develop a statistical method that matches the kind of leagues you play. I play in a lot of Superflex Dynasty where we play multiple flex positions. So you have more starters in the game. And if you have more starters in the game and you have more teams in the league, you have more players in play every week, okay?
Right.
When more players are in play every week, having some consistent players helps you win matchups because there'll be guys that I'll go up against and my fourth flex. I've got my super flex quarterbacks, and I believe in going heavy quarterback in super flex. I want to have the studs in super flex. I'll patch and fill at other positions, but I want good quarterbacks. So my quarterback matchup, I usually will win. My running back matchup, I don't really care because running backs get hurt so often. I'll patch and fill. Hey, I won a league with Jarrett Patterson and Dare Ogunbowale last year. So you can find running backs to patch and fill, but you cannot find those solid 10-point wide receiver guys.
It's hard to argue that.
Yeah. So if I'm playing in a lot of multi-flex leagues where I've got more players in play, I want the guys that are going to be 10, 10, 10, 12 every week. I want consistency over anything else. If I'm playing in a standard ESPN, one quarterback, one flex, and only two starters at running back and wide receiver, I want the upside guy because – especially in the playoffs, I'm going to roll the dice on the upside guys. Now, the joy of what I developed with Best 10 is I simply said, and the crazy thing about what the professor and I are doing with Science of Fantasy Football is we show you the process. So you can steal all you want as far as the process goes. We just know you're not going to be, you're going to be too lazy to do the math. But
exactly. And you said that in the article. In the article, it was like, you're welcome to use this, but you
Here's
won't.
This tool. You're too lazy to use it.
But the key is we're scientists, okay? So we show all of our data. We show all of our research because our goal is to make everybody a better fantasy football player, even though it's going to hurt my bankroll at the end of the year maybe for people that are reading. The process, the math, the scientific process says you help everybody get back. You advance the science of fantasy football because fantasy football is all about numbers, guys. It's all about numbers. And if you figure out a better way of managing the numbers, there's so many great websites out there. Football Guys. If you read the research that has been done by football guys, and a lot of the football guys that I read back in the late 90s are now doing their own thing or on Sirius XM or, they're everywhere. But those original guys like Dave Dodds and Bob Lung and, they're all over the place now. They're the brainiacs of this business because they've seen it and done it all. But the goal is to show the research, show the process so people can get to the next level.
Good point.
Are you going to be at the expo?
I am not going to make the expo, guys. I was planning on being there this year, but I have to MC the pre-show for a demo derby at a county fair. Now that is that's unbelievable. But no, it wasn't a case of passing it up. It was about the day job taking precedent over the fun job. But yeah, I'm Monday through Friday, I'm the morning show host of WITY Radio in Danville, Illinois. You can listen to us online at wityradio.com and be annoyed by me Monday through Friday, in addition to being annoyed on Twitter. But no, our biggest fair of the year is coming up, the Georgetown Fair. It's one of our biggest shows of the year. I get to call everything from a barnyard pull, tractor pull. Get to work that to
live play-by-play.
Interviewing the fair. Yes, I get to do play-by-play of a tractor. Luckily, I've got a guy who's the encyclopedia of tractors, Russell Boer. He knows more about tractors than anybody else. But anyway, I won't make it to the expo. I had to cancel at the last minute. Between that and my Frisbee football team going to the playoffs, it's been a busy summer.
Man, well, I am excited to see the scores roll in for my fantasy tractor pulling league. That goes without saying.
Yeah, do you use the best 10 method?
There you get a simple method. Whoever's belching the most black smoke is probably going to win.
Right. That's right. Oh, man. All right, so for some of our listeners, so they play in some dynasty leagues, and so they're very, very hyped up on rookies, myself being one of those people. How do How do you rank rookies? Obviously, since your best 10 score takes into consideration previous scoring from a couple seasons back. How do you go about projecting rookies, or how do they fit into your what you're looking to do weekly? Because obviously you can't just sit them at the bottom and say, oh, they haven't played football, so they're bad.
No, and
Travis.
it's yeah.
I don't draft rookies. I don't do it.
I'm allergic to rookies in redraft. I
Oh,
really
no.
am. I
Oh
really
my
am.
gosh.
Because here's
Amazing. Can you
for-
say it again?
the thing is, I'm allergic to rookies in redraft.
Yes.
I'll never take a rookie quarterback in redraft ever. Okay? Never,
Whoa.
ever, ever. Because there's just too many other options that are out there. Even in a super flex league, I'd rather have a safe second quarterback like a Kirk Cousins. He's not
Right.
exciting, he's not sexy,
No.
but you know what you're going to get from him as your second quarterback.
That dude is 2%
in a super
milk,
flex
I'll
league.
tell you that.
Yeah, versus taking a shot at a Zach Wilson last year or a Mac Jones or anybody.
Right.
In all of my super flex dynasty leagues, I was getting quite a bit of ridicule last year for saying that I would take Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts over any of these quarterbacks, even in a dynasty super flex.
Whoa.
So yeah, and
Even
and as
with
it
Jamar
turned
Chase
out,
forgetting how to catch the ball, you went and took that take.
Yeah.
yeah, it's in Trey. This year Traylon Burks can't breathe, and who else?
Yeah.
I mean, I never listen to the camp crap.
Yeah.
I
mean,
went
he's on a
to my-
ventilator, from what I've heard. Like, by
And then-
now,
and Velas Jones qualified for AARP, I hear. So
Yeah.
I've actually heard great things from him. I've got a buddy who reports on the Bears, and he's been telling me
Yeah.
that Velas Jones is his top guy out of Byron Pringle and N'Keal Harry. He's at the top of that esteemed list.
that's why I love. My strategy is really different. I love to take a lot of rookies in dynasty leagues, even in startups, because after a certain point in a draft, okay, then you're looking for upside. Early in the draft, I will pass on rookies in redraft. First 8 or 9 rounds, I'll usually pass on those rookies. There's a
Right.
few exceptions, and the exceptions are guys like Brees Hall, who I really like this year because
you.
I'm either about to go insane or the Jets are going to actually have a football team this year.
Right?
Um,
I'm excited about
so
the Jets.
yeah, so I'm excited about the Jets. I think the Jets are going to actually be a team this year. I have a feeling the coach is really good. And, they got a lot out of that team last year with a really abysmal offensive line. They've got to be better this year on the offensive line. But getting back to your point, which was a very good point, how do you rate rookies? That's
Right.
a great question. And how do we rank rookies if we're doing projections of year-end stats? We're also guessing a lot, right? But in best 10, we actually have a little advantage with weekly values because we have established values of the guy that was in that position the year before.
Whoa.
So in other words, with the Jets, we have Michael Carter.
Mhm.
Michael Carter scored and established a weekly value after the season went. It wasn't great. It wasn't horrible. So if you're the Jets and you go ahead and you draft a guy pretty high at running back, do you expect that guy will be better or worse than Michael Carter?
I would hope he'd be better. It's hard to be much worse.
You'd expect him to be better. So
Right.
the question is, you take a guess at how much better he's going to be. And now here's where the mind-blowing second fact about fantasy football comes into play. You don't have to be perfect on your projections to make money in fantasy football. You simply
What?
have to be better than the consensus on a player.
Right.
So last year, for instance, I had Cooper Kupp ranked. My top side had him WR4, and my worst had him WR10. His ADP was worse than that. He ended up on 80+% of my teams last year.
Oh my gosh.
I
That's
was
nice.
wrong. I was wrong on him by a huge margin. I was embarrassingly off on my weekly value projection for Cooper Kupp, but it didn't
Nobody
matter.
saw that coming.
I
No.
was better than consensus, so I cashed in. 2 years ago with Aaron Rodgers, I was way off on Aaron Rodgers' great season. His last
Hmm.
great season. Last year wasn't bad, but 2 years ago, of course, he had that big year. I was off on him, but I had him ranked as my QB3 that year.
Oh wow.
He was going like seventh, 10th, depending
Wow.
on the league you were drafting in. So I was had 80% exposure to Aaron Rodgers at a cheap
Man.
price, and I
That'll
and
do
I
it.
cashed in. All you got to do is be better than the consensus. You do not have to be correct,
Yeah.
and that's where my weather forecasting skills actually came in to
Yeah,
play on
how
this
does
because
that tie in? How do you go from like, man, you know what? On my days at work, typically I like looking at clouds. And when there are no clouds, I like to look at footballs. Like how does tie this together for me?
it's
How
data. It's just a
Okay.
bunch of numbers. Okay,
Okay.
so weather forecasters, not to be confused with the pretty boys and girls on TV, who are just weather people. They're weather personalities.
Right.
The real weather forecasters down in the trenches, and I have been told that I have a face for radio, so I'm in the right profession. I tried to
I
be
like
a
that
TV
line.
weather. I tried to be a TV weatherman, and the agent said to me, "Kid, this is back when I had hair and I was young." He says, "Kid, you're not going to go very far in this TV business. You got a face for radio." So
Oh my
anyway,
goodness.
I embrace that, and my wife thinks I'm cute, so that's all I got going.
That's
for
all
me.
that
There you
matters.
go.
But no, but weather forecasting is really data analysis. That's all it is. I mean, you can eh, statistical models of the atmosphere give us a bunch of numbers to look at. They're all gibberish until you understand them, until you analyze them. Until then, there's this huge pile of numbers. So you learn how to analyze it. And when I worked for United Airlines, which was like the New York Yankees of weather offices back in the day, I was this young pup, first big storm on the job, and I missed a typhoon
Ooh.
forecast for Japan. I missed it by 150 miles. And I got
Ooh.
a write up in the company newspaper about how great of a forecast it was. Because
Not by your
because
standards, though.
I know I had it farther out to sea than
Oh
any
my
other than
goodness.
the Japanese Weather Service or the U.S. Navy, the other two big forecasting outfits.
That's
I
incredible.
They missed by over 250 miles. I missed by 150 miles, and so I was
Wow.
better than consensus, and I gave a forecast briefing that told the
Unbelievable.
airline how to make money off of flying around this storm and dealing
Wow.
with this storm. I gave them a very conservative operational plan based on my forecast. My forecast ended up not
Wow.
working out. It was
Of
better.
course.
The weather was better than forecast, but because I gave them an operational window, it worked. Same
Wow.
thing with fantasy football. But here's the thing, guys. I probably learned more about data analysis at the horse race tracks with my dad as a kid. Because,
Out
I
of
heard
here.
that when I was listening
yeah,
to your podcast earlier this week. It's
horse
like, oh,
race,
he's no, you're
yeah.
predicting everything.
It's
That's
so
awesome.
so when I yeah so when I was when I was 16 years old, my dad was a big horse race fan. I used to like to hang out at the track with him, and I looked at what happened and I looked at the numbers in the program, and I was a geeky kid. I was on my way to being a meteorologist, for crying out loud. Who at 16
There you
years
go.
old is loving being a meteorologist?
It's
So
the dream
I
for every kid. I mean, to be
it
honest.
is, Hey, Johnny wants to be a fireman. Dennis wants to
Yeah.
be a
Yeah.
meteorologist. So anyway, it was
It-
it was the same thing. It was just this pile of data. And so I just
Man.
started going through these programs, and I read this cool book that talked about putting figures on races and what these meant. But it wasn't looking at the end times. It was looking at what happened in the segments of the race. Sound familiar? Weekly values, the
Yes.
segment of a
Yeah.
season. So anyway,
Wow.
I started handicapping horses officially when I was 16 years old. I was so young they had to put my dad's name on the program for the because a friend of his was a tip sheet guy, and Len Sokol saw what I was doing, because my dad gave him this whole write-up that I did about handicapping harness racing. He says, this is brilliant. When my son, who's the handicapper, Norm Sokol, goes on vacation for his 2 weeks every year, you're the forecaster, you're the handicapper for Sportsman's Park this year. And for 3 summers I did that. But the first 2 summers I was too young to have my name on it because I was underage. But it was hilarious because it was numbers. It was just numbers, and that's what fantasy football is. But it's understanding percentages, and it's understanding the numbers that count. In harness racing, the final times of the race are what everybody looks at. If a horse goes back in the day, 156-2 was a fabulous race. And if a horse went 156-2, but the other horse went 157-4, everybody bet on the horse that went 156-2. I'd bet on the horse that went 157-4 because he ran a 28-second last quarter and gained 5 lengths on the field. It was pace handicapping.
I mean, as you know, though, end of race stats are lazy stats, though. So
there you go.
that is what I've learned about horse racing.
Exactly, and that's why the stats that you see for flat racing, for thoroughbreds, you'll see speed rankings, you'll see buyers' speed figures, because the track is always a different speed. So they try to analyze that and come out with a speed figure. In harness racing, end speed, the final race speed, isn't as important as it is in thoroughbred racing. And again, that's where I learned that you play to the rules of your league in fantasy football.
That's very
because
true.
you have to understand your league rules before you can understand how to attack that league.
That's smart.
It's true. I listened to, I think it was 3 episodes ago, and you mentioned that you were in a 14-team draft at the moment of recording.
Yeah.
And you were, I think, 7 or 8 rounds in, and you had yet to draft a quarterback. You were currently waiting, hoping that Kareem Hunt would fall and be your RB1. I'm curious how that ended up. The names that you said that you had taken, that you couldn't pass for a running back, like Brandon Cooks, Allen Robinson, are some of our favorite guys. I've been on Allen Robinson for months now. Since the day he was traded there, I said he's a top 15 guy.
Yeah, Allen Robinson is a guy that I really like. He's my WR20 this year.
Okay.
So again, I don't have to be perfect. If he ends up being anything better than 20th, I'm celebrating because he's on so many of my teams. But yeah, the roster that I ended up putting together for that team ended up being pretty awesome. And again, Kareem Hunt's like one of my early
So he
running
did
backs.
fall.
So he did fall.
Okay.
I got him, so thankfully. But yeah, I end up with a kind of a mess in that league. But I'll take the mess. I think I'll do okay with that league. It was a tough league, and it was one of these deals where the rules are different.
Yeah, they were funky. They were
funky.
Every time you would say a new rule, I'm like, oh my gosh.
So they're heavy for yardage for running backs. Okay, so it would have been fine to take, Jonathan Taylor if he had been available, but I was drafting at the end of the draft. So I went with guys that I thought were value. I went Jamar Chase. I couldn't believe he was available in the second round. But I noticed a kink in the rules. There's a point for every 15 yards of passing yardage.
Ooh.
Okay.
A little bit of a bump.
And 6 points for TDs. So I took Mahomes because Mahomes is going to be throwing.
Yeah.
And Mahomes is going to have a lot of 300-yard games. Why? Because he always has a lot of 300-yard games. I know Tyreek Hill is gone.
I'll say, but they lose all their weapons, Dennis. He doesn't know how to play football if Tyreek's not on the field. That's what people forget. He never even played football until he met Tyreek Hill. So
the dip in Mahomes' ADP has been wild.
Oh, it's been crazy. It's been crazy, but look at these stats from the first half of this season last year. The league figured out this offense.
Yeah.
That was their championship-winning offense. They figured this out.
Tyreek
is going to go deep, and Kelsey's going to beat you over the middle. So what did they do? They shut down the middle, and they put 2 guys on Tyreek. Tyreek couldn't go to the bathroom without having two guys there. So
They
it
struggled
was,
for a little
they
bit.
just put him. And so what did they do? Then they learned how to dink and dunk and play the short ball, and their offense improved.
Right.
But dinking and dunking might
Yeah.
work just as well when you've got three good receivers instead of one great receiver. So
Yeah.
the Chiefs the Chiefs were getting mileage out of Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson. Okay,
They
so
were
now,
making fantasy owners question, is he worth a waiver wire pickup? DeMarcus
yeah.
Robinson?
Yeah,
And then the next week you get 0.
But as a Chiefs fan, I understood that offense. That offense was designed to have one weird element every week to try to take the heat off of Tyreek, because Tyreek would be taken out of the game for the most part. Now you can't limit the cheetah. So the cheetah got his points, okay? But the offense struggled, so the offense had to find another option. Teams were starting to trying to jam Kelsey on the line as much as they could, and putting two guys on Tyreek. So every week they game planned for one of their other guys to be a thing. And so DeMarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle were perfect wide receivers for the Chiefs' old offense because they were great blocking wide receivers. And here's where I think fantasy football people, they don't understand. I see them, why is that guy getting a contract? He's not as good as this other guy. I'm like, well, they don't really care about fantasy football points.
There's more
they
to
want
it.
to win games. And this guy can block. He's a good wide receiver who can block on the edge. So that's why they got MVS from Green Bay. He's a big guy. He can block, and he'll be a good red zone target. Does that mean he's going to be a great fantasy football guy to have on your team? Maybe as a late round best ball punt, but not solid. But
do you think
now,
Julio Jones is going to be a good tight end? Do you think?
I actually think Julio Jones is going to get the Gronk yardage. He's going to get a lot of the Gronk type of passing. I love Julio Jones. I just picked him up on that same crazy team that we were talking about. I drafted
I think I swung too far. I think I swung way too far in the Julio hate, so to speak. I clowned on him a lot, Dennis, and it's like now, like I started thinking about it yesterday. I'm like, there's a good chance that he is that big body, inner slot guy that they can just, run seams, run option routes with. And then they don't need him to be the 20s guy. They don't need him to be the 10, 15-yard guy. They need him in the red zone. And I am afraid that I have gone way too far, and he's going to end up with like 8 touchdowns, and I'm going to look like an idiot.
So here's where the weather forecaster in me comes to play again, okay? I famously, and I don't mean to brag, I was a fairly good weather forecaster back in the day, but I
in the Hall of Fame, so to speak.
Yeah, for San Francisco weather, yes, I invented a system for their weather that's still being used by everybody in the industry. So it's kind of cool.
Must be hard
and it was developed. It was developed with the same statistical methods that went on to build Best 10. But that's a whole other story. Yeah, so I was a really good weather forecaster back in the day. But I famously forecasted 7 inches of partly cloudy in 2 hours in Denver, Colorado. And I did it on the day they were moving from the old airport to the new airport with all their equipment, and they got stuck in a blizzard. Oof. So the moral of the story is I blew a forecast really, really bad.
Then they gave you the Nobel Prize.
The absolute worst. Yeah, I could have. The absolute worst day to make the worst forecast. And then I show up at work the next day, and I have the guts to say that the snow is going to be holding off 50 miles away from the airport. So I went back to the same forecast. I have no memory card, okay?
You trust the system. You trust the system you build.
Correct. When you're in weather forecasting, you realize that you're going to have some horrible, horrible forecasts. Yeah. You're predicting the future of the weather. I once was playing basketball. I used to play at the Y, all these pickup games. And I said to a guy, I said, we were talking between games, and he says, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a weather forecaster." He says, "That's pretty cool." I said, "Yeah, but it's not rocket science." And he says, "Rocket science is a lot easier." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, I'm a rocket scientist."
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he says, "I'm a rocket scientist." He says, I go by equations of motion and equations, and I know if the I build the equations right and I build the rocket right and nothing breaks, it's going up. He says, "You're forecasting the future. That's a lot
Stuff
different."
out of your control. Yeah.
So yeah, that really opened my mind. I'm like, oh my God, but
Wow.
forecasting the weather is no different than forecasting a harness race or a horse race or anything else. You're going to be tragically wrong sometimes.
So
you're gonna pick the worst horse in the race sometimes. So Julio Jones last year was a guy that I'm thinking, oh man, I projected him pretty good, and he let me down. But here's why he let me down. Here's why he let everybody down. Not only was he playing through injuries, but he went from a pretty high volume passing game to a low volume passing game.
Right.
And all of a sudden he went also from being the top banana on a team to clearly being the second option on a team. So he was the second option, okay, on a low volume passing team.
but we had seen Corey Davis
all-
as the second option be fine.
But Corey Davis is also a hit and miss guy. He was a huge variance to him. He would have great weeks. He'd have a 20-point week,
Yeah.
and then he'd have that 1-point week. Kind of
Right.
looks familiar to that
It does. It
earlier
does.
lesson, doesn't it?
But when you look at 900 yards, or I think it was 900, he was just shy of 1,000 yards. Corey Davis was.
Right.
I remember projecting and talking about Julio last year, saying, if Corey Davis is doing that, Julio should at least have 1,000 yards.
You would have thought so, but he didn't, and it was sometimes
It was brutal.
Oh, it was brutal, and sometimes offenses don't fit guys. Okay,
Yeah.
that's the biggest worry. And if I look at all the misses that you have with a stat tool like Best 10, if you don't do the forecasting right, if you just use the data from the previous 2 years, if a player is changing teams and he's changing into a worse passing situation, a worse situation for scoring points, and Julio Jones scores his points in fantasy a lot different than Corey Davis does. Okay, he was a 7 to 10 target guy in Atlanta. He dominated on targets, but it wasn't. That wasn't how Corey Davis was like a 2-target, 30-yard, 40-yard play guy. But the point is, Julio Jones forecast horrible last year. But look at that ADP this year. Man,
Yeah.
it's
There it
free
goes.
square time, okay?
It's
Are
a
you
lot.
scared
will
of
go-
Devante Adamson in a similar switching to a worse situation, more crowded room, worse quarterback?
I'm
He's
forecasting-
most people's wide receiver 4 or 5 right now. For you,
I'm-
what's his range?
Yeah, I'm forecasting a big drop in Devante Adams this year
Oh, wow.
because I do look at the data and I say, God, he's gonna have to be worse than he was
Has to be.
last year. Okay, he's got to be much worse. But here's the thing: he's coming from an unbelievable height.
Right.
He's got a consistency to a 10-point floor. 10-point PPR floor is how I look at consistency.
Right.
97% of his games the last 2 years. So
That's
he might.
insane.
It's insane.
That's
So he's going
unbelievable.
to get the targets. So he's going to get the numbers.
Wow.
He's my WR3 this year, right behind Jefferson and Chase.
I
I put him in number 3, and again,
Over Cup.
that means I'm putting him on over Cup, yes. And it's
Wow,
all
okay.
a volume thing. See, Cooper
Wow.
Kupp had more of his touchdowns last year.
Right.
He had such a high percentage of his touchdowns. Okay, the concept of regression is real, and
Yeah.
so
It's
Cooper
incredible.
Kupp will come back to the pack a little bit. But
Sure.
I've got Jefferson, Chase, Adams, Kupp. Those are my top 4.
We've talked about on the show like how Cooper Kupp has the breakfast narrative. Like, is there really anything like you've got like the college roommate, Devante Adams, Derek Carr? Is there like a midnight Taco Bell run relationship here? Like there has to be something between these guys that we can go. Like he can't fall off that much. Like maybe not. Maybe they're not having scones, okay, but they're having quesadillas on the side with a Baja Blast, and they're just having a good time going over route combinations. Like I feel like that's a possibility here.
I don't know. At the old weather forecast office, we used to have some of our best evening forecasts for bad weather situations when we had a pepperoni and jalapeno pepper pizza.
Ooh,
But
all right.
it didn't mean that helped us forecast the
Direct
weather better.
correlation.
It was-
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
there's
Correlation
and
does
causation.
equal causation there.
Yeah, so
that's
it's
100%
just one of those things. But no, I do think that familiarity does pay off. You do have a favorite receiver
Of
as
course.
as a quarterback. You lean on that guy. So if they went to college together and they developed this routine together of knowing it, like two players that play together in the same sport, and frisbee football, just like regular football, we've got two guys on the Chicago Union, and Pavel Giannis, who's I've referred to as the Patrick Mahomes of Ultimate,
Oh my.
and Ross Barker, whose nickname is the Swiss Army knife of Ultimate. But the two of them have been playing together so long that they know where each other's going to be on the
You
field.
can tell immediately
Every
by watching.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these guys play club disc, all season long, and then they play in the pro league. So their number of games that they played together is certainly so many that if you've got this coherent offense that has played the same offensive system, they're going to
Right.
be better at it. So I do think there's something to that. But is Derek Carr the same level of quarterback as Aaron Rodgers? No.
That's tough.
No.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he's the level of quarterback. Honestly, I mean, there's other weapons now though in Las Vegas. So yeah, I can definitely see your point. Maybe Devante isn't as hyper targeted. It's going to be hard to the market share, the target share that Devante has had the last few years. He's not going to have to be the only one that moves the chains. He's not going to be the only one in the red zone that they're really targeting. So I think you have a good point. I think bringing him down from the top 3 to the top 7 realistically is probably closer. Would you say he's about top 10 then, or what kind of range, real quick before we move on, would you kind of put him in real quick?
Yeah, he's my number 3 guy, but I'm not taking him in the first round. Okay? If he falls in the second round, and this is where draft strategy all comes into play. Numbers are great, okay?
Yeah.
You've got your numbers and all that, and I'll blow you away with one, okay? Deontay Johnson. He's my number 6 wide receiver.
Oh,
Whoa.
I'm gonna blow your mind with.
I
I'm
need a
gonna
glass
blow
of
your
wine.
mind.
That's
I'm gonna blow
spicy.
your.
That's
I'm gonna blow your
spicy.
mind. Yes, it is. I'm gonna blow your mind with another one. Brandon
Oh,
Cooks is
my.
my WR9.
Okay. I actually like that. I've heard a couple analysts say that they've got him
Oh.
12 to 15,
We're
and
dropping
he's just
bombs
climbing and
here,
climbing.
Dennis.
9 is as
And
high
I'm
as I've
gonna-
heard.
And I'm gonna continue to blow you guys
Yeah,
away
just keep
because
drop him
the,
on.
the sun god, Amon
Amon-Ra?
Ra St. Brown.
Oh, where's
is my,
this guy? He's
is
wide
my
receiver 1.
number 11. Number 11. And
Oh,
I was
Okay.
with you. I was with you the whole way, and you just lost me.
So
D-Mike,
I will
come on,
continue-
D-Mike.
I will
I love
continue.
this.
I will continue to blow your mind because I've got Juju Smith-Schuster at number 14.
I love that.
Oh, okay.
Okay? And I got
Travis can get
Elijah
that.
Moore. Elijah Moore at 15, and I already told you I have Allen Robinson
Right.
at 20. Now here's the thing, guys.
Mhm.
I'm not going to draft Deontay Johnson as the 6th wide receiver off the board because I
Yeah, you don't
don't
need to.
have to. I'll wait for him to
Wow.
fall
Okay,
to me at the
okay.
right spot. So, but if you look at the weekly values and you look at consistency, you will notice that there's a big gap between the top 5 at wide receiver, and then it starts falling off. And then you've got
Right.
this huge glut of guys from that, end of the top 12 guys all the way down into the low 20s, their weekly values are skimpy. So that's why you should load up on running backs more than ever this year, early in a draft, because the elite running backs are few and far between.
Right.
And after the elite guys, then there's a second tier. And after that second tier, you've got like guessing after that.
Yeah, like a Ronald Jones.
Do you think Kelsey is worth an end of the first round pick?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is even though I'm forecasting Kelsey to drop 10% in weekly value this year as he gets older. Okay.
Of course.
Age is eventually going to grab tight ends. So I'm very conservative with my forecasts. So I've got him dropping 10% this year, which puts him as my third tight end. But having said that, correct. It's going to be crazy. Mark Andrews is number one. There's no doubt about it.
You don't think
Mark Andrews
you don't
is my
think
number
Mark
one.
Andrews was a little inflated from that
No.
second half stretch of last year?
No. The second half stretch of Mark Andrews is just like people were saying years ago that this second half stretch of Derrick Henry isn't going to live up.
Okay.
It did for
You know,
three
I might
more
not have
years till
I
he
might
got
not
hurt.
have agreed. I might not have agreed had they kept Hollywood Brown, but I feel like now that they do just have those two weapons, I feel like that might be within the range of outcomes now that Mark Andrews just has that role, has that 25% and 29% almost target share.
He's the best receiver on that team. And he isn't really a tight end. He doesn't really line up at tight end the way a traditional tight end does
He's
all
just
the time anyway.
open.
He's just open. And he's a big target. He's the favorite target of Lamar. He was the favorite target of Huntley when he was in there.
Right.
So he's the favorite target of whoever is alive at quarterback with Baltimore, and both quarterbacks are fairly good. So I've got Andrews number one. I would take him late in the first round, but I don't have to.
You don't
and
have
I would
to.
I would take Kelsey early in the first round, and or late in the first round, and I have to, okay,
Right. Yeah,
if I want him, and I'm cool with that because even if I have him rated third in my tight ends, he's still in the elite three, and
That's
of course, more blowing you away of who's number two on my tight end list because it's not Kyle Pitts.
Don't say Darren Waller. Don't say it.
No, Darren Waller's declining on my tools.
Is it Kittle?
He's dropped in. It is Kittle.
Kittle
when he's healthy is probably
Monster.
the best tight end in the league.
Yeah.
When he's
Wow.
healthy. And
I
this
could see
goes
that.
back. This goes back to the whole way that best 10 started and why it's called best 10 and not best 12 or best 14.
Right.
I was sitting around the studio getting ready to do a NASCAR segment up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin,
As one does.
WSSP, the fan. And of course, it's in the, it's like late August. We're sitting there talking before, and we don't want to talk about NASCAR anymore before the broadcast. We're going to talk NASCAR and racing for the next hour. So we're all sitting around. We're getting ready for our fantasy football leagues, and Radio Joe and Steve Zotke, and we're sitting there talking, and actually Sparky Pfeiffer stopped in, so we're talking to Sparky, who's a big football guy, and Radio Joe says, I don't know why you're taking this guy, why do you like him? He's injury prone. And I'm like, well, first of all, I can't predict injuries. Second of all, I'd rather have this guy for 10 really good games than have a mediocre guy for 16 back then. And it was like, oh my God, I just figured this out. I couldn't wait to get home and check this out. This was like 6 years ago. And
But my brain now, after talking to you, is because you don't get 0 on the other 6.
Right.
Yes,
that light bulb
makes
has gone
sense.
off tonight, and I feel like I'm a better player because of it.
That's
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, and this is the thing, guys, is you always have to be looking for how the game is changing, too. And with running backs dropping like flies lately, I mean, they just can't seem to get a healthy season out of anybody. That's how these guys limp into an RB6 season. And Zeke Elliott is not a bad running back. He was playing hurt, so his stats are deflated because he was hurt. I actually increased his weekly value this year because I know he was playing hurt every week. So he was good to his team, cost him in the fantasy football world, but finished RB6. You can't argue with that. But he wasn't the sixth most valuable running back on your team. But he is the reason that I started beta testing another crazy idea that I've had. Because running backs are so few and far between that are getting huge, heavy loads now, right? Nobody's carrying the ball 30 times a game like they used to, and nobody's even getting 25 touches most games.
Right.
So it dawned on me, if I've got a really good offensive team, why not play them both? So in dynasty leagues, I have maneuvered myself with draft picks to on some teams with good running attacks to have Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon.
That's a great point. I think that's a
And
stellar.
I might have to try that out.
And this year, on one of my teams, I just kind of lucked my way into having Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Ronald Jones.
Ronald
So
Jones,
now I can-
one
now
of
I
my
can
favorite
play-
players in the NFL.
Goodness.
Now I can play them both every week.
That's incredible.
One of them starts as running back, one starts as a flex. And if I get the max points from that team every week on a good offensive team, I'll take it. It's no different. It's
You just made Travis's day. You just made Travis's day.
It's no different than playing a stack and having both wide receivers on a great passing team.
Yeah, the mentality, I think people's instant reaction to that is you're limiting your ceiling. But in season-long regular redraft leagues, you're not so much worried about limiting your ceiling as you are having your high floor. And one thing that I discussed with Dustin last year, I'm trying to find a formula to get to in our league. You need 110 to 120 points a game to win.
Right.
If I can build a lineup that averages together 115 to 120 points a week, I'll be fine.
Yes.
I need to find their points per game, and now I'll be using your method to find their weekly average. Build that to 120 points a game is the goal. Once you're there, be content. If that means getting 8 from Dillon and 15 from Aaron Jones, it's not, well, AJ Dillon gave you single digits. Together, they gave you enough. And then they'll flip-flop next week, and you're not going to miss out on that touchdown.
Correct. And
I'm a floor guy. I've always been I'm very much a floor over high ceiling guy.
And that's actually a good way to attack that. And it doesn't mean that, hey, if I can maneuver on a dynasty team where I have, a healthy Dalvin Cook and a healthy Derrick Henry, I'm going to take those two guys over playing, Dillon and Jones.
Sure.
But if I don't have those guys and I'm looking at a team where I got to make a decision every week and it's not a decision I'm happy with making, why not play them both? Why not limit your bleeding at running back and then pick up that edge at every other position? But you're
This is
right,
transformational
Travis.
right here.
Yeah, and Travis, you're exactly right. You have figured out what the score is that you need to post. And if you post that and somebody beats you because they have a higher score, great for them. But this is why in a lot of my leagues that I play in, especially the higher dollar value leagues in Dynasty, I love having that rule where you play a game against the median score.
Yeah, it's becoming a lot more popular now.
It is becoming more popular, and it builds it into the guys like you and I who have figured out I just need to score a set number of points.
Right.
And if I can hit that value 80% of the time, I'm going to win enough games to make it to the playoffs. And if I make it to the playoffs in fantasy football, I can run the table and win the league. And that's what a lot of people I see in Dynasty. They're like, well, if you're not the top two teams, you just got to rebuild. No, injuries happen. If you make the playoffs, you can win the championship.
Once you're in the dance, anything could happen.
Once you're in the dance, then crazy stuff happens.
Yeah.
You know, Dennis, one more question, because there is a player on our show that we've started championing, and you know what, the fantasy community has obviously come around to this guy. We've had arguments that he's not, other people have told us, he's not Justin Jefferson, he's not Jamar Chase. We're curious where you have him as well. we are big fans of CD Lamb. We have made a case that, and I've even brought up to Travis today, was that you know what the pieces are really starting to fall into place for CD Lamb to have that outlier, you know, target share, you know, possibly even, you know, red zone target and touchdown numbers, to have that outlier wide receiver one overall season. I'm curious where you have him in your ranks, because we've already talked about guys like you know, Devante Adams. Where do you have him? And please tell us that you love him, or just absolutely destroy our hearts.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing: is young wide receivers, they keep getting better for a number of years. Okay, C.D. Lamb, if you look at his weekly value just last year, okay, and you look at the numbers that he produced, and again, this is a cold hard ranking. It's just the points add up and they are what they are.
You're gonna
He was
hurt
the
me. I can
20,
feel it.
he was the 28th best wide receiver in the league last year. Okay, he only had a 68% average on hitting that 10% or that 10-point PPR, but that was a 16% improvement from the year before.
Okay.
I forecast a 20% improvement for him this year. Again, young player. Usually, young players usually go up 10 to 20% without any changes. I could make a case for a 40% increase for CD
So
Lamb.
you're telling me there's a chance?
So I've got him forecast as my WR8 right now.
Okay.
I like
All right.
that.
Solidly eighth,
I'll take
but
it.
but he's got the capability of cracking the top 3 or 4 if everything goes perfect. Now,
that.
everything going perfect means that Dak Prescott has to turn around what was a bad season for him last year.
Right.
His weekly value declined. Still a quarterback that I like. I'm
He
heavily
didn't seem
invested.
comfortable.
He just didn't seem
At any
comfortable.
point. He seemed
Yep.
shell shocked, almost spooked by, and I don't know how you're not, by the leg injury, but another
I
off
mean-
offseason, another year. I live in Dallas. It's not Cowboy fever. I just am very, very excited. I think CeeDee Lamb, the announcers are going to get tired of saying his name to the
So we
extent.
call him Disc Sheep. Like that's
Disc Sheep.
Yeah. His name is Disc Sheep on this show.
Just like Devante Adams and Cooper Kupp, like, you know, Romo's watching the game saying, it's going here. It's going here. I think that's going to be CeeDee Lamb this year. I think he's going to be that guy.
Yeah, he is a
CeeDee
lamb in
Lamb
lamb's
at-
clothing.
CeeDee Lamb at times last year just looked lost in the game. It's like he could be bullied maybe by the cornerbacks. They could get tough on him, and he was out of his game a little bit. But
Right.
then he'd have these games where he looked all world.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see more of the all world. Here's the greatest thing. I mean, this goes back to an old thing that Coach McGuire used to say as a basketball analyst on NBC college basketball games when I was growing up. He'd say the best thing about a freshman, they become a sophomore. And the best thing
Yes,
with
well
young
said.
young football players is they learn how to survive
That's right.
in the NFL. And CeeDee Lamb has put up decent stats. He hasn't been a great value in fantasy football to this point because of the lack of consistency. I don't see him as being a traditionally inconsistent player like Amari Cooper was.
Right.
Right.
Which Amari Cooper was a hit or miss
Frustrating,
guy
so.
when he was with Oakland and then with Dallas. His stats didn't really change much. He always had those down games where the defense could take him out of a game.
Right.
And
Or he was
CeeDee
on the
Lamb-
road.
Correct. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Or
So
it was
CeeDee
cold
Lamb,
outside.
I think CeeDee Lamb benefits from Cooper being out of there.
Right.
I don't. I actually think both Tolbert and when he comes back, Gallup are good enough to keep the super coverage off of CeeDee Lamb. I think they can be burned enough with Gallup going deep when he's healthy, and Tolbert
Right.
I think is going to be a decent wide receiver in the NFL. That's enough to take the heat off of off of CeeDee Lamb. Plus, they got to figure out a way to stop Schultz. I mean,
Yeah.
Dalton Schultz was a tight end that I really liked in the weekly values. I got a ton of him on dynasty teams as a result of knowing that he was the better tight end there in Dallas. And this year his ADP is getting pretty close to where I don't want him on my redraft teams, but he's still going to be a force to reckon with in real football. You got to stop that guy because he will hurt you. He does well with yardage after the catch for a big guy.
I think that if Jason Witten can make a career out of 5-yarding you to death, I think anyone can make it as a tight end. I truly believe it. I also think CeeDee Lamb's going to come back and have like a Michael Jordan type of, like, right after he was done being beat up by the bad boy Pistons. Like, he's like, I'm going to start working out, and then he's going to come back. And I think I'm really hoping that's the call there. I hope that's the prediction that comes true. But I mean, good points. I'm hoping that with Amari Cooper out of town, maybe this is his year.
And one last thing I want to share with you. I got a little quiz for you guys.
Ooh.
So,
all right.
So here's the joy of weekly values is that they do pick up on guys that showed enough to be skillful, okay?
Ooh.
But they don't do what a lot of fantasy football guys do, which is chase points, okay? So you got this player, I'm going to call him Player Z. I'm not going to even name him.
Love this.
So back in 2020, he had 4 15-point games late in the season when most of the other wide receivers went out with an injury.
Okay.
Last year, let's say this same mythical Player Z had 2 more 15-point games and had a big game in the playoffs. Again, when other starting wide receivers got hurt.
Right.
And big finish to the season. Fantasy football players all over this guy, right? They're like, hey, I want this guy on my team because what if he played really good in these 6 games here at the end of the year, the last 2 years. I want this guy on my team because if he has those games he plays a full season as a starter for 17 games, this guy's going to score. He's going to be like a top 10 wide receiver. And they draft him like that.
Oh.
And then he does what? He'll disappoint you the next season because guys can have these short spurts, okay?
Yeah.
But the difference between Player Z, who had these mythical great games and a fabulous game in the playoffs where he might have scored 4 touchdowns, the difference between him, I'm just using a mythical 4 touchdowns.
This guy doesn't
throwing
actually
that
exist.
out. It's not a real player. That compared to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who everybody is like telling you that he only was good because nobody else was healthy. Hawkinson was out. This guy was out. And that guy was out. Well, guys, he was doing it with a second-string quarterback and a third-string quarterback, and he was getting
the guy you're talking about.
Could you imagine if Amon-Ra
Player
played for the
Z
Bills?
wasn't doing this, but I'm saying Amon-Ra St. Brown got over 10 targets for 6 games in a row.
Yeah, right.
And, to end his season and had a great second half of the season, the whole second half. And I got news for you. Hawkinson played a couple of those games, and he still was good. But people are all out on ARSB, but this mythical Player Z is going to be fabulous. And
Dustin, do you have the initials in your head?
Player Z,
I know exactly.
Player Z might be fabulous, okay? But the point that I'm making is you look at the situations, and you have to prove it to me over more than just 6 games over 2 years in order to get a good best 10 score.
I have 0 shares of this player.
You need to score consistently. But people are on this guy every year.
Yeah.
And
we have,
and for good reason. Player Z's, those Player Z's, they look great at the end of the season.
Right.
People expect them to do well. But then we're inconsistent because then we turn around and we bash the sun god because he only did it when everybody was hurt. Well, the players he did it when everybody was hurt too, but we're okay with that because, hey, he had that big game in the playoffs. So
one big game will do it, man. One big game.
We chase points, and that's how we end up with tight ends like Robert Tonyan on our rosters. You know, he had 2 touchdowns, and then he didn't see the end zone for another 6 weeks, and then he had 2 touchdowns.
For sure.
And he ground out a good season, but he never had the weekly value. And speaking of the sun god and the Detroit Lions, I'm actually more on Hawkinson this year than I was last year, and everybody was on Hawkinson last year, and he did not pay off. This year, he's got the weekly value numbers backing him up from his healthy games last year. He is going to be that less than elite but second guy that you want. If you miss on the elite guys, take Hawkinson. If you miss on the guys like Hawkinson and Schultz and Goddard, who are going to go in those middle rounds, you know, after you go too early because everybody's like, oh God, I missed out on Kelsey and Andrews.
Right.
Everybody, they're going to overpay for those. If you don't overpay for those, get Freiermuth. Freiermuth is the other tight end I really like this year on the upside. Again, he's not going to be elite, but he's going to keep you from losing a lot of points at tight end.
Do you have Kmet in that group with Pat?
Whew.
Please tell
love the kid's athleticism. He hasn't shown me the weekly value numbers, but here's again, Travis.
Don't you think that's room for positive TD regression?
Absolutely.
That has to be the only reason. The volume's there.
No, absolutely. So here's the thing: is I do live and die by the weekly value numbers early in a draft. Okay, first 5-6 rounds in a draft, I'm going to grab my weekly value all stars, and I'm going to be happy.
Okay.
Once you get past that certain point in a draft, you're past like your 8th round and later. If you're not looking for upside, you are an idiot. So if I'm in the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th round, okay, and I'm looking at a guy and I need a tight end, and my choices are ordinary, veteran, 28 to 32 years old, who I know what his role is on the team, and I know he's going to grind out that year-end total that everybody's going to love. Oh, he's tight end 10.
Logan Thomas.
Yeah, tight end 10. Yeah. Who cares? Yeah. He was losing out by 7 points a game to the elite guys every game, but he ground out because he played 17 games and stayed healthy, and he ground out a tight end 10. I'll take a Cole Kmet over that guy every day of the week.
Okay.
Because I want my guys to have the potential for upside. That's why late in the draft, I will often go for an unheralded rookie and take a swing and a miss.
Sure.
You got a waiver wire, use it.
Yeah.
Like if I'm wrong about a rookie, if I'm taking a lot of Velus Jones this year, late in drafts. Okay, he's got to beat out.
He's 50 years old.
He's got to beat out Mooney. So what? He can take his walker out there and
there you
go. Get enough,
Wait,
enough points.
Who's player Z?
Oh, really?
I mean, we haven't said it yet. I mean, we know,
exactly
but not everybody's gonna know. I want to hear the name.
Well, my guess would
he's
be
a mythical player.
My guess would be Gabriel Davis,
GD,
the wide receiver 2 that should never have been mentioned. Like,
I cannot confirm or deny.
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. All right, I get you, Dennis. Well, hey, that was one. You've fundamentally changed the way that Travis sees
absolutely
fantasy football, which is so I got to tell you, that in of itself is a very difficult task. We've had this argument for years. I'm glad you finally broken the seal on the year-end stats or the end-all be-all. We can now move on with our fantasy football lives. Thank you so much for the knowledge and the time. More importantly, it's been a pleasure, man.
That was great.
For those of you listening and watching at home, make sure you check out Dennis over there. It's got some great work over at scienceoffantasyfootball.com and the Science of Fantasy podcast. He's got some great articles if you're interested in learning more about this process. I know I'll be checking them out. Dennis, is there anything else that the people need to know before we sign off here?
Yes, never stop learning in fantasy football. So this is my 6th year of forecasting weekly values, okay? And I know it works. But the professor, John Bush, over at Science of Fantasy Football, and to give you another site to check out, for frequency's sake, our Data Lab podcast, which is a shorter, more condensed, sort of pre-chewed meal for you to give you an idea of what we're working on. That's over at For Frequency's Sake, and John Bush, the professor, is my my co-host there. The professor has stumbled across something really cool, and that's games
awesome.
over median. And
Okay.
we're beta testing it this year. And over at the scienceoffantasyfootball.com, we'll explain why, and we'll show you the data all season long. We're not sure, but we think this might be a big clue on how to pick out some of those sleepers. Jalen Hurts is our #1 quarterback in games over
Spicy.
median. So
Okay.
it's very interesting to see that that young player who some people love and some people hate, and some worry if he's going to keep his starting job all season long. He's our games over median superstar. It's beta tested. This
Wow.
year is all beta testing, just like for the last couple of years. Like this is the 6th year that I've been doing the weekly value forecast. This is the 3rd year I've trusted it. So
Okay.
That's
it
awesome.
gives you,
man. What?
yeah, it
Thank
gives you
for
an
the
idea
honesty.
of where we're at. But thanks for having me on, guys, and thanks for putting up
Absolutely.
with me. I could talk a lot, but
We're gonna
We
have to check
appreciate
back
it.
in after maybe week 4,
Yeah.
week 6, and see how the rankings are going and what you've learned going into year 7 or halfway through year 7, how it's
and we
going.
will and I will be updating the rankings and weighting them for the 2022-2023 season. So
Cool.
That's exciting.
as the weeks go by, the players will have to use some of their points from this season, and it will adjust the rankings quite a bit. So
Very cool.
I use a 2-year data window when I calculate my weekly values, and it does sort of smooth the data out. Once we get into the season and we weight them for the current year, it makes a lot of changes.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
That's awesome. We'll make sure we include links to all these things in the description of the video, and we'll post the link on Twitter as well. Thank you again, Dennis, and for all you listening, thank you so much for tuning in, staying with us. As always, losing sucks. Don't do it.